Hello, Camp Sunburst kids. Today you're going to be learning how to use watercolor paint. It's traditionally seen as a very difficult medium, but you'll find out that it's actually pretty easy to do. So you're going to follow along with me and copy everything I'm doing. First thing I'm going to do is I'm starting with a piece of watercolor paper, which you should have. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide this piece of paper into 6 blocks. And they don't have to be perfect. And I'm using a ruler just to kind of help me create my blocks. And what I'm doing to this paper is I'm creating lanes. Imagine lanes or sidewalks on a street where people will walk or cars will drive. And the reason that you're doing this is so that the areas where we're going to be practicing won't run into one another. So each of these locations is its own separate little experimental area. The other thing you'll see is that you have places to label what you're going to do inside of each of these boxes. Notice that it doesn't have to be perfect. This is a practice paper. This is where we're going to experiment and play with watercolor. So allow yourself the freedom for this not to be perfect. You can even see my blocks are not even equal, but that's fine. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to number my blocks. Number 1, number 2, number 3. And the reason for this is that you can refer back to this paper afterwards to remind yourself of how to experiment with watercolors. If you take a look over here at the materials that we're going to be using, you'll see watercolor sets. And you might notice that they look kind of dirty, right? Well, the lovely thing about watercolors is that they, not like other paints, they go to sleep when they're dry. So even though they look kind of messy, they're fine. They come back alive when they come in contact with water. So if your paints look like this, that's not a problem. You probably have brand new paints, and don't worry about if they get dirty like this. You'll see I have clean water, paper towels, a pencil, and an eraser. And I have several brushes here, large, medium, small, straight edged on top, pointy ones, pair of scissors, my ruler that we just used a minute ago, some wax crayons, and some rubbing alcohol. And we're going to use these materials here to play with the watercolor paint so that you can see all the different things that watercolor can do. Okay. Coming back to our paper, in our 6 boxes, we're going to be doing 6 different techniques. And our first box here is going to be what is going to be called wet on dry. And I'm writing this here so that you can see, you understand what we're going to be doing here, and also you can refer back to it afterwards so you can refresh your memory on what you did in that box. Wet on dry means that the paint is going to be wet and the paper is going to stay dry. By the way, notice the paper that you got has a fairly thick surface to it, and it should be kind of textured. That's the best kind of paper for watercolor. It absorbs the water, it controls the water, and the paper doesn't buckle that much as maybe copy paper would. If you come over to the paint, you'll notice that if I didn't have water in the paint, nothing's going to happen to it. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to dip my brush into the water, get it nice and wet, and I'm going to select a color. It doesn't matter what color you select. You select whatever color you want. And I wake this paint up by adding water to it. Okay, I pick up a little bit of paint. Notice I'm not digging the brush in too much. I don't want to damage the brush. So just kind of gentle. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring wet paint over to a dry piece of paper. Okay? And notice that I'm using a big brush. That way it's easier for you to see what I'm doing. You can use a smaller brush if you would like. Now, I want you to notice that the paint is only going where my brush goes. The best way to control what the paint is going to do is by making sure you're putting wet paint onto dry paper. Okay, so the color stays only where I'm putting it. I am in control in this block. Okay. While I have this color in here, I'm going to go ahead and add, just for fun, so you can see that this is the time to be creative. I'm going to go ahead and try it in another direction. Well, no, because then I'll allow yourself to mix colors. Okay, so that is wet on dry. The paper was dry in that instance. The second box, box number 2, we're going to call wet on wet. So if this was wet on dry paper, this paper here has to be wet paper, wet paint on wet paper. So in order to prep the paper, we need to get it wet. So I'm going to clean my brush and I'm going to bring water. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to make the paper wet first. No color, I'm just painting the paper with water. Some people ask, well, how much is too much water? A trick that I use is sometimes I'll look at the paper from the side, and if it looks nice and shiny, that means that there's a good amount of water. I can see the reflection. I like that amount. Okay. Now I'm going to go pick up some color, take my brush, fill it up with lots of color, and wake another color up here. It's a wake. I'm adding a little bit more water. Now I'm going to bring my color over. Remember, this paper is wet. That one was dry. And notice that when I set the paint down, the paint doesn't just go where I have put the brush. It goes everywhere, and it goes where the water is. So when you want a less controlled, more atmospheric effect, you can make the paper wet first. I'm going to pick up another color, and you'll see again the color doesn't just stay where I've touched the paper. It spreads and it creates this beautiful, very sort of tie-dye effect, which is very characteristic of watercolor. Okay, so you see the difference. Okay, so we've done 2 examples, and all we have used is paper, paint, water, and the brush. That's it. And we've created these 2 beautiful effects: wet on dry, wet on wet. Box number 3, we're going to use some more material. We are going to do what is called a wax resist. Resist means push away, to keep away. So what we're going to do is we're going to be using a wax crayon, which is crayons are made out of wax, and we're going to be experimenting with how wax interacts with watery paint, with watercolor. Okay, so the first thing you need to do here is you need to make a mark with a crayon, whatever color crayon you want. But the key here, and very important, is that you have to press hard with this crayon. I'm going to show you 2 examples. I'm going to show you an example of me not pressing very hard, and then an example of pressing hard. So here's me not pressing too hard with the crayon. And, oops, and if you break the crayon, that is okay, no problem. Now you can see the difference. I have pressed crayon hard and not pressed crayon hard. Now we're going to see what this wax does to the watercolor paint. And so here I go. I'm going to go wake up another color. So I've loaded up my brush with water. I go choose a color. Let's choose this orange. And I'm going to go get a little bit more water. And my brush is now going to be full of paint and water. It has to have a lot of water. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my brush over, I'm holding it sideways, and I'm just going to very lightly go over the area that I put crayon, wax crayon down. I'm going to do it again to the other one. And you'll see that here where I did not press hard with the wax crayon, the crayon was not strong enough to resist the water. But here, where I did press very hard with the wax, which is the way you're supposed to do it, you can see that the wax pushed away or resisted the paint. So this is an effect that you can use. And let me, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this color a little bit darker so you can see it even better. So what I'm going to do is waken up another color here, and I'm going to come back to this. And you can see you get this batik, which is where you create designs on fabric using wax. So you can see the difference. Not successful, successful. Okay, that is okay. So this was an example of wax resist, using the qualities of wax to resist or push away the watercolor paint. And again, the key here is you have got to press really, really hard with the wax. This was unsuccessful. This was successful. All right, next technique, box number 4, we're going to label this as salt. All we're going to say is salt on this one. Yes, we are going to use a traditional, very standard ingredient that you'll find in the kitchen to play with watercolor. So here I go. I'm gonna wake up a different color. Let's see. I'm gonna wake up a dark purple. So here I go. Add a little bit of water to it. Do a little bit of scraping at it, just very gentle. Lots of water. And I'm going to come to the paper where it says salt, and I'm gonna set down some color. Now take a look. This purple looks kind of light. Now why does it look so light? What that means is, if I come back to the paint, what that means is I didn't press quite hard enough inside the paint. Watercolor paints, they have the ability to be very bright and strong, and if you notice your color is not doing that, then you need to come back and pick up some more paint. So that's what I'm doing right now. We're going to see if there's a difference. There we go. You see the difference in kind of light pastel color and a little bit brighter. And what I'm going to do to this, even though this is purple, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up blue. I'm still keeping this purple, but what this blue is going to do is it's going to help to kind of wake up this purple. Purple is made out of blue and red, and what I'm doing is I'm increasing the pigment in this color, always with water helping me out. Okay, so I have water in this space, and I have lots of color. Now, in order for this technique to work with salt, you have got to have, like I have here, a good amount of water and a good amount of pigment, just like that. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do right next to it an example of not having enough water or pigment. So our next step here is going to be to pick up some salt. Let me bring my salt over. And I'm going to pick up just a little bit of salt. I don't want to have too much in my hand. And I'm going to just sprinkle it on. And you'll see, what is the salt doing to the color? You can see that wherever the salt lands, the color is absorbed into the salt, because what does salt do to water? It absorbs it. If I added too much salt in one spot, you sort of lose, the effect is a little bit mottled. Okay, And if I come over here to this section where the color is too weak and maybe there's not enough water, the effect is a little bit harder to see. Okay. But in some instances, maybe you do want to have that sort of mild, calm effect. Okay, so that's what salt can do. Now, let's come back up to box number 1 with the same salt. Box number 1 where we painted about 10 minutes ago, wet on dry. And let's see if this works on a color that is dry. Now, take a look. Do you see any color being absorbed into the salt? No. This only works if you have enough water on the paper, because then the salt has something to drink up, to absorb. Okay? That was using salt. Okay, we're on box number 5, and this one we're going to call scratch. Now, scratch, we're going to use scissors, but if you don't have scissors, you can use other tools as well. So I'll use scissors and I'll use different tools. There are 2 effects that you can get from scratching the paper to produce nice effects with watercolor. One of them would be when the paper has wet color on it. So what we're going to do is we're going to make our paper a little bit wet here. I've added just some water. And let's pick up another color. I'm going to wake up black. Okay. So I'm adding black. I've got water there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my scissors to scratch, and I have them open, and all I'm going to do is in that space pull, and you can see the effect that you can get. You could use this for hair, fur on an animal, to draw leaves on a tree. Nice effects. Now, wherever I scratched on the paper, the pigment, the water went into that spot where I scratched, and it made it darker. Okay. Now, let's say you don't have scissors. Okay, no problem. I can use maybe the back side of a paintbrush. Let's see if this works. It does. Okay. Now, that is one way of using the scratch effect. Now, the other way of using the scratch effect is to scratch on paper that's a little bit not as wet. Now, this has a little bit of water on it, right? So what if I want to speed up the drying effect? Okay, so what I take is a piece of paper towel, set it on top, and I can pick up some of that water. So now the paint's there, but I'm realizing I don't have enough color. See what I picked up too much of the color, so let me put some more color down. I'm going to pick up some of the water. By the way, paper towels are also a good way to sort of erase. You see how I'm it's not really easy to erase watercolor, but you can to a certain extent. So you see I picked up some of the color there. Now I'm going to scratch again, except that this time the paper is not as wet as it was here, nor does it have as much color. And what I'll get, hopefully this shows up, yeah, there we go. What I'll get is I'm scratching, but instead of the color going into the scratch is lighter. It's more than likely the color of the paper underneath. So you're going to get a white effect. Again, you could use this for fur, you could use this to put snow on Christmas tree. There's 2 different effects here. Dark, when the paper is wet, more color. Light, when the paper is drier, less color. Okay. All right, box number 6 on this sample, where we have been playing with watercolor, seeing what different materials can do to it, is we're going to call rubbing alcohol. oops, alcohol. Now, in this one, we need to make sure that we have a good amount of paint and color on the paper. So I'm waking up red, bringing some more water, digging around there, not too hard. And I'm going to fill the space with some color and some paint. I mean some color and some water. All right. Now this is red, but it doesn't look too strong, does it? When you're mixing colors, don't be afraid to add similar colors. So similar to red in this instance, because it's not quite red enough for me, is orange. So I'm going to pick up some orange. And let's see what the difference is. See how just the addition of a similar color is making the color a lot more expressive, stronger, a little bit brighter. Now, that's nice and strong. It's a little bit on the orange side, so I'm going to bring back a little bit more red. So here's the original red. Here's a red. Here's a color by itself. Here it is with a little bit of help from an analogous color, a similar color. So don't be afraid to mix colors like that. You get a tremendous difference in the intensity of the color. All right, so we have color down. We have a good amount of water in the color. It's got to be, in order for the color to be able to do these tricks, in order for watercolor to be able to do all these fantastic tricks, you have to have water for the most part. Okay. Now, what we're going to be using is just rubbing alcohol. And what I did already was I poured a tiny bit into the cap of the bottle. You don't need that much. And I'm going to use, you can use an ear swab, you can use another paintbrush. What I'm going to do is I'm going to dip my brush into this rubbing alcohol. Let me move it a little bit closer. And I'm going to touch the paint. And what you'll see is that the rubbing alcohol repels or resists the water. This is one of the most surprising effects when I do this with students in the classroom, and they are delighted when they see what happens, because you're sort of creating this tie-dye effect. Now, would this work on paint that's dry? Well, let's see. Right here, this scratch area that we just worked on a little bit ago, the paint's dry. So let's see if this works. It doesn't. So what does that tell you? That tells you that when you're doing these techniques, you need to make sure that there is a wet area on the paper. Let's come try it over here on box number 4. Why did it work? Because there's water still there. Okay. Now, this paper that has 6 techniques, you just learn how to play with this very simple watercolors. You learn how to play with them in 6 different ways with very simple materials. You have also labeled your paper so that you can, if you forget how to do one of these techniques, you can come back to it, you can refer to it later on. Now, the other thing that I like to teach my students how to do is to always, no matter what it is that you're creating, always sign your name and date it so that you can, maybe 10 years from now, you look back on this and you can remember, oh yes, I did that in 2020. This is like a little note, some notes for you to refer to for later lessons, and we'll be continuing in other lessons on how to play with watercolors.